be true for sure that when your primary relationships thrive, you thrive. And after a decade of coaching high-achieving, driven, ambitious empaths, relationships tend to be one of the subject areas that most folks come to coaching not thinking that they could benefit from support around. And it becomes one of the primary topics that we talk about. And I think it makes a lot of sense because we have a relationship to everything and everyone in our lives. And whether it be empowered or disempowered, we don't always think about who we want to be in the matter, who we want to be in the relationship. And so much of what we learn about relationships comes from what was modeled for us in our primary childhood relationships and by our primary caregivers. And if your caregivers have healthy, deep, connected, intimate, open communication relationships, then lucky you, you have a beautiful, healthy, connective model to follow. But so many of us don't realize that the relationships that we learned from weren't necessarily the types of relationships that we want to be in, the types of communication patterns that we want to have, or just really how we want to show up and be in our relationship. So for all these reasons, and for so many more, I'm so thrilled to have Jelisha Gatling on the podcast today. Jelisha is a couples therapist and a strategist for therapists who need to boost their boundaries in private practice. With an anti-hustle style, she helps therapists thrive financially sans the burnout. Now, I know all my coaches and other service providers can absolutely relate with what Jelisha is bringing to the episode today. You know, when you're a high-performing and career-driven empath, business growth can often come at the expense of important relationships in your life. And when you are thriving and prospering in your business, it can be so much easier to put your attention towards where you're winning and forget or avoid or distract yourself from these other more tender areas that you may not necessarily know how to improve upon or deepen or transform without some support. So this is certainly a subject area that I've gotten so much support around over the years, and I'm really excited to share today's episode with you. We are not holding back, y'all. Today we're going to go deep. We talk about the work of letting go of your positionality, your need to be right in your relationship, and being able to start rewriting your narrative for the health of your relationship. Getting clear on your triggers and your history so that you can better anticipate a breakdown. The link between needing to be in control and struggling to feel happy and cherished in your relationship. The power of setting boundaries to not only protect yourself, but also to make sure that you are following through in your relationship and showing up as the best version of yourself. We talk about all of this and so much more. So let's jump in. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Jelisha, I am so thrilled to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for our conversation.
Before we jump in, will you share your pronouns with us?
Sure. She and her are my pronouns.
Perfect. Before we started recording, I shared a little bit with you about why I was so excited and grateful to record this episode with you. And I think I'd love to just share it again for our audience, because I think I'd love to start the conversation there. And it's this idea that, both I identify as an ambitious empath, and many of our listeners are also very driven, type A, career-oriented, high-performing entrepreneurs and leaders across the board. And one theme I notice in a lot of my coaching work is that sometimes when we're so driven by our career, it can be at the expense of our primary relationships, whether it's at the expense of creating that relationship and doing the vulnerable work of opening our heart, or the day-to-day effort of maintaining that intimacy and connection within that primary relationship. And I haven't had anyone on the podcast to talk about this experience of having it all. How can you both be in the relationship of your dreams and thrive and kick ass in your business?
I feel like I could talk for hours about this. So, and can totally resonate with that. Absolutely. They're so interconnected, and it's something that comes up a lot in my private practice and working with couples. So yes, where shall we begin? Or I'm not sure where to go, because I could go in a number of directions.
I know. Well, why don't you start by just sharing a little bit more about your practice and how you niched down into working with couples and premarital counseling?
Yeah. So I'm a licensed marriage family therapist. I've been working from the very beginning with couples. I've always known that was going to be what I wanted to focus on. I've been doing that for, 7 years now. I've been in, is that right? 6-7 years in private practice. And I've always just been fascinated with relationships and relationship dynamics. I remember being a kid and literally interviewing my neighbors, just I would notice different things that my friends' parents did from mine, from the way dinner was to how chores were split up. And I would often question Mom, is this normal? How come you do this? And at my friend's house, they do it this way. So I was just always super curious. And any opportunity I had to talk about relationships, write about them at school, I always tried to implement that into the project. So that's just continued. And I have recently, in the last 2 years, I'm shifting more into premarital counseling, which I'm finding just kind of adds some spice to things. While couples therapy typically is really problem saturated and focused on an issue that they're having, and can be super challenging. I've worked with a lot of betrayal and infidelity repair. That was a niche of mine initially. And so I've worked with high conflict couples and some really layered stuff, but I'm finding that I need a mix of premarital couplings as well, just because it's a totally different tone and energy. And I find that it just spices things up for me to kind of have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And it's a lot easier to, emotionally reset and make sure that, you're taking care of yourself when you have those, what I call lighter sessions with new couples who usually aren't coming in with big issues at that point.
Mm-hmm. I could really appreciate that, because I could imagine a lot of the work you do with premarital counseling is really setting couples up for success, creating the agreements and the communication dynamics that will ensure the longevity and success of their relationship, versus repairing them from the breakdowns related to those challenges.
Oh, absolutely. And premarital counseling, typically couples, they have more curiosity. They're curious, they're open, and it's just a whole different vibe. It's easier to get them to explore different possibilities versus when you've been in maybe a dysfunctional pattern for years and years. I have to teach them to unlearn patterns and habits, and also learn certain things that they're doing they think are helpful or actually not. And so it's a lot of unlearning. I feel like that's the hardest part of couples therapy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a totally out there question, but when there has been a breakdown in the relationship, whether there's been a betrayal or hurt or a breakdown in trust, and there has to be kind of this willingness to open your heart again, kind of give up your opinions or judgments, or kind of like, this is just the way they are, right? Yeah. There has to be a willingness to let go of that positionality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you do that work?
Well, I approach it from a narrative standpoint. So I use a lot of what's called narrative therapy, where I am listening for what are the dominant storylines or the dominant narratives that you have about your partner, about your relationship, about yourself as an entrepreneur. Like we all have narratives that are tied to certain parts of ourselves. And so I try to listen for what is a dominant recurring storyline that I'm hearing. It could be, my partner's really inconsistent. They're inconsistent. They're not consistent. It could be, what's another one? I really struggle to set boundaries. Like that is something that I struggle with. So that's a way that they experience themselves, and it can be really overgeneralized. And so what I do is I ask them, first off, where else does this impact you? Like, because usually they're coming in talking about their relationship. And I ask, does this show up at work? And what I'm listening for is a space where that doesn't show up. So like, for example, I might have a couple where she's saying he's not being consistent with XYZ. And I find that that's not an issue at work. I'm curious about it. And then I'm trying to sort of combat this black and white narrative that they may have about themselves or their partner. And another good example might be, I've worked with so many people who say that they can set boundaries at work, but when it comes to their relationships and dating, it's so hard, or vice versa. And so I try to explore and first combat, hey, we're not going to like take that black and white narrative and own that, because this actually is evidence that that's not actually the case, because usually it's a problem saturated narrative that they're coming in with. So I'm looking for evidence to combat that. And then I'm exploring what's different in this situation. Why is it so hard for you to put boundaries up at work? What's going on there? Let me, versus when you're with your kids or with family, you're able to do that like hardcore. I've heard all these examples. So I'll kind of pause there. Does that make sense?
It does. It has me curious. What's the modality that you practice? What's the style of therapy?
So this is narrative. It's called narrative therapy.
Mm-hmm. Narrative therapy. Yeah. So it sounds like you're trying to disprove their experiences.
I'm trying to expand. I'm trying to help them expand the possibilities, especially of like what a moment could mean. And so if your partner lets you down in some way or disappoints you, let's say that they're late for a dinner, and you're feeling a certain type of way about that. What are you going to make that mean? That's what I'm trying to get to. So your partner was late. What does that mean to you? Like, what's the story that you're telling yourself when that happens? And then being able to explain to the partner who was late what that brings up for them. So at the core of it, it's usually, I feel unappreciated. I feel like you're taking my time for granted. I feel like you're selfish. And they may just respond or react, I'll say, from a place of, here you are being selfish again. And so if I hear that, I'm like, okay, there might be a selfish dominant narrative going on. Let me listen for if that shows up in other places. So just being able to gather evidence I really am trying to employ curiosity. Like that is what it's about. Hey, let's explore what else this could mean. Let's explore a possible reframe. What else might this mean? Maybe they got caught in traffic and their phone died and they weren't able to reach you. But, let's like actually pause for a second and explore alternative meanings, or invite our partner in and write the story together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that framing, because I imagine that when we're clear about the breakdowns in our relationships, and we're also clear about the meaning or the significance that we attach to those breakdowns, and we're present to them as the impacted, and our partners are present to them as the impactor, then there can be more, I guess, space to provide the care or the repairing or the generosity, I guess, that's needed to reconnect.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I'm just sharing, like, this is like such a small snippet. There's so much within this modality that I love, but it's so customized. And so it's such a great way to explore the meanings of certain things for your partner. And then, we can also identify childhood wounds that may align with that, the thing that you're looking for within your partner. So if you feel like your partner is being really selfish and that's something that's been said and thought, and that's how you view them, then you're going to be looking for that to show up in spaces, and you may forecast that, and you may even enable it to present that way, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And, oftentimes couples are literally sitting on the separate ends of the couch with two totally different realities of how they experience the relationship. They're writing their own story. So that's why I'm listening for, what are the storylines? What are the dominant narratives? What is it that it's just really important to pull that out. And oftentimes couples are coming in focusing on the content and the dishes and the kids and, changing this about their partner. And I'm like, let's explore how you might experience your partner as is in a more preferred way. Yeah.
I just got so much from that. And I got even more excited about this episode because I work with a lot of empath entrepreneurs, right? The name of this podcast is The Prosperous Empath. And something I so deeply appreciate about empaths is how much we give, how much we contribute, how much we care, how conscientious we are. And this shows up in empowered and in disempowered ways. And I often notice this dynamic in romantic relationships showing up in just this really hurtful, painful way where we give and we give and we give without opening ourselves up to receiving in return, or without asking for what we need, or without just being really clear about what we want. And I noticed this theme both with myself, but also with many, many clients. And so I'm curious, maybe I'll just take some free advice, but I'm curious for our listeners who I'm sure can relate with this. Like, where do we start in rewriting that narrative?
It's one thing that I think is helpful is what I try to do is put a name to the problem. So this could be with, if I'm working with a couple, if I'm working with someone individually, let's detach the problem from your partner or you or the relationship. So it's almost like externalization is the word, actually, like the psychotherapy term in narrative therapy, where I may present with, I am depressed. I have so much depression. I am struggling with anxiety. I'm an anxious person. I am a depressed person. It feels very personal, like it's a part of you. There's something about externalizing that and almost making it like its own entity, like it's separate from you. And so I use language like, and it's not something I describe to them. It's the way I shift my questioning. So I would ask, when do you find that the anxiety comes about and gets in between the two of you? When is it most present? Is it usually, after work? Is it, how frequent is it? Do you find that it happens around the holidays? Like, let's find this pattern and sort of explore what might help to enable anxiety to come around and try to get between the two of you, and also talk about how you can ward that off so that the two of you can turn towards each other. So like just making it that, it makes it so that it's a team sort of effort. Like we're all exploring how we can work against the depression and the anxiety. And that, could have to do with maybe decompressing after work. Maybe you need 10, 15 minutes like of just silence before you engage with your family or before you start dinner, and you just keep going. Like little things like that is how I explore with couples. Hey, you have a say in this. Anxiety is not it's not in the driver's seat. Kick it out. Like, how do we get you in the driver's seat? And, and best managing it. I'm not in any way trying to dismiss the reality of having anxiety or depression, but I'm trying to explore what are the possibilities in the current context and what might we explore to better manage this that we haven't done.
I love that reminder to look through the lens of like, how can we anticipate a breakdown? by getting really clear about when and where and what are the conditions present in order that it is more likely to occur. In my line of work, we say, this is something I just often joke with clients about during the holidays, like, just an aside, like, it is likely that your survival mechanism is going to have an attack when you go home to visit family for the holidays, because where do you think your survival instincts were born? So have your spoiler alert. And then secondly, with my couples, I often offer the reminder, like, no difficult conversations after the sun goes down.
Yes. Yeah. Like, let's set up some. Yeah. I love that. Totally. Mm-hmm. And like really inviting them. I'm like, this is not the Jelisha show. Like, come in, let's all explore. Let's throw some stuff out there. Just like brainstorm. What do you think could be helpful to you? Because I want to like help them, arm them with a sense of agency. I'm not helping your relationship. I'm throwing some stuff out there for you to chew on and see what might fit with you. What are you curious about? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's see. There's another theme that I notice a lot with clients that I wonder if we get your 2 cents on, is that a lot of my clients are women identifying, and they are in control in their romantic relationships. They're in a whole lot of control. And I would say the degree to which they want to be in control varies. I think with time, they recognize that they're actually more interested in releasing that control. But I would say that in the beginning, they're often pretty committed to maintaining that sense of control. And they're wondering, and they're struggling with being happy and feeling cared for and cherished by their partners.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that familiar?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I probably say 60, 70% of the couples I work with, usually heterosexual relationships. Yes, women identifying clients, absolutely, hands down, often do lead with, it's all on me. I do everything. And then as we kind of explore back to the beginning of the relationship, I'll say something like, it sounds like you've been driving the whole time. Like you've been driving, and it makes sense that you're tired. And the frustration and resentment often comes from wanting their partner to take more on, or to create space for them to just be and take things, off the plate of whatever responsibilities that they might have. And they have to recognize how they've helped to maintain that dynamic. So it's not blame, but it's stepping back. And like, I think what you said earlier, how do we both contribute to this dynamic? I always say dynamic. I don't say, like I say, this is a dynamic. It's a context. Okay. I'm not, I want to, yeah. So I do that. And we then really talk about, okay, what are all the contextual factors that may have played into how this problem is being maintained? Are you always talking about serious stuff like right before you go out the door? Maybe you shouldn't talk about budgeting because that might provide, like that might not be the best time. Are you talking when you're hangry? I cannot problem solve, or if I'm hungry, I can't do anything. So it's, like making sure that you sort of know what are the things that might make you more susceptible. And now I'm not sure if I even answered your question. I think did I go off on a tangent there?
I think, no, they're all connected. Like, I hear you speaking to kind of setting yourself up for success and having those difficult conversations versus what are the circumstances that might kind of facilitate a helpful and supportive conversation around these patterns and dynamics, as you say, or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah. I'd love to come back to the control piece and hear what other gems you have to contribute, because I think that experience of doing it all, and having everything feel like it's on you, that emotional labor, it really does breed resentment in relationships.
Absolutely.
And I also think can be very easy for women identifying clients to justify why they feel upset and hurt, and they need to be in control because they have all the evidence for how their partners fell through, or how they didn't pick up the kids on time, or when they snapped at the kids. Like, we have the kind of this ability to be very detail oriented and remember what our partners did and didn't do, and how they did and didn't do it well and correctly and perfectly.
Absolutely. Oh, it's so tough. Aside from, really investigating how you might be helping to maintain the dynamic and exploring what you can begin to do. Sometimes I might even take it out a little bit more and say, where else can you just start to practice to ask for more? Where can you take steps to not overwork at work? And maybe it's saying no to that extra project or staying late. Like and how can you set up this boundary to help you really provide more space for yourself, and also set up that expectation with your boss or with your partner or whoever it might be, or your client even. And so I think it's really taking into account, how can I have a say? How do I have some control in terms of releasing things? So not taking focus on your partner in terms of what they need to do, but putting, that's not the way I want to say it. Because there's typically a lot of focus on what they're not doing, how they're letting you down, but really taking into account, okay, am I following through with boundaries? Like, am I actually enforcing? Is there a response that aligns with what I said would happen if XYZ doesn't improve? And I find that a lot of times there is no follow through, and there's not really much at stake for the partner who is disappointing left and right, because it becomes a fight and then they sort of move on. And then 3 weeks later, it's back up again. Maybe it's good for a couple of weeks, but it's been that way for years, typically with clients that I'm working with. And just basically describing to them that and normalizing that this is going to be hard unlearning. And also, I'll stop there. I feel like I'm rambling.
No, it's gold. This is all gold. Something that first of all, I really appreciate your approach, because it feels very solutions oriented. Mm-hmm. And what can we practice differently? How can we create new patterns and new dynamics, and rather than reinforcing old ones that don't work for the couple? Something that I get to have a big chuckle with clients around is really taking stock and taking ownership for how we created the dynamics to be this way in the first place.
Yeah.
And that, if we essentially, we train the people we're in relationship with we train them in what to expect from us. We train them in how we show up, in what's predictable, and how we're going to respond, in what we will do. And the people that we're in relationship with, they come to have expectations of how we're likely to respond. When they do X, they will do Y. And so when we can really start, and what I hear you saying, and I really agree, this is something I work a lot with clients on too, is that when we really start to see that, oh, wow, this is how I allowing the dynamic to continue in this way. This is how I'm contributing to it. This is how I created this. Then we can, reinvent who we be in relationship with our partners, and not just partners, right? The same is true across the board.
Yeah, totally. I think once you recognize that and you're like, oh, wait, when I go back to the beginning, I never said anything about wanting my car door open. I'm just going to an example that came up this week, and really wanting that. And now all of a sudden, having feelings about that, it wasn't something that was necessarily set up or shared was important, but it's aside from identifying it, I think owning it. So I'll give an example in business with a few years ago, when I realized that my boundaries were out of whack as far as late cancellations and maybe people being late or time going over, I was like, oh, I don't know how to I don't know how to stop the session. It was like I was helpless. And then I'd be mad because I went over 20 minutes. I didn't charge for that, or I didn't charge for this late cancellation because I felt bad or like I was punishing them. I basically did a lot of work. I revamped my policies, and I opened up as I shared this with each client. I said, look, I want to take accountability for not enforcing my policies and being a little, all over the place, where I charge you sometimes and I don't. I said, moving forward, am no longer going to go over time. I named all these things, and I set up things to help me do that. Like, I have a little light timer that goes off when we have 7 minutes. There's something about 7 minutes that just feels right before we transition off, and it lets everyone know. It's been so helpful. And also just having that conversation and stating it and owning it. Like, I've followed through with that. My clients now expect it. But, that's a way that I look at how we can sort of repair. I'm owning it. I'm not saying it's you. This is my part, and things are going to shift. I'm apologizing for not being consistent, but moving forward, I will be. Do you have any questions? How do you feel about this? Blah, blah, blah.
I mean, I love that from a business coach perspective. And I also love it through the lens of what we're talking about with our partners, because when we can recreate the boundaries and the dynamics about how we're going to show up in the relationship, and we can communicate with our partner what they can expect from us moving forward, well, then we get to follow through on what we said our partners can expect from us moving forward. And I just have to share this story from a book, and I'm dying to know if you've read it. Have you heard of the book Drop the Ball, Achieve More by Doing, I think it's like Achieve More by Doing Less by Tiffany Dufu?
No, I'm writing it down.
It's a beautiful book, and she's wonderful. And she talks about this dynamic in her relationship with her husband, where this very dynamic that we're talking about, that she was realizing that she was doing everything, that all of the emotional labor was falling on her, and that she was a working woman, just like he was a working man, and they had 2 children, and she couldn't do it anymore. And through working with mentors and self-reflection, she really took stock of the relationship and how she had set it up for her partner to know that, if she would always have it, that if any ball was dropped, she would always pick it up. And so she had one of these very conversations that you mentioned having with your clients a couple of years ago. And she created agreements with her husband about what was hers and what was his to handle in the relationship, right? What was she responsible for? What was he responsible for? He was responsible for the mail. Her husband, one of the things, he had to pick up the mail and bring it up into the kitchen, open the mail, and handle all of the mail, right? This was his responsibility. And then, lo and behold, he gets an assignment somewhere in Africa, and he is sent away on a work consultancy for 6 months, right? So now Tiffany is facing this challenge of, I recreated agreements with my husband. He's responsible for checking the mail. Like, who am I going to be about the mail? Am I going to pick up his ball that he dropped, or what? And she really had to take a stand. She had to take a stand for the agreements that she had recreated with her husband, so that he would respect her when she said what she needed and honor them, right? Honor his side and trust that she would honor hers. 6 months later, he comes home, and 6 months of mail is on the kitchen island. This is a true story. She didn't pick up the mail. And she talks about in the book how this was such an immense learning for her as much as it was for him, because it was truly through being willing to not pick up the ball that her husband dropped that she learned to honor what she said and follow through on it. And her husband learned that he was going to have to follow through on what he said too, because his wife was no longer willing to pick up his dropped balls.
That is such a great story. I can't wait to get this book. Oh, that's so great. It's such a great example also of, when I'm talking about this with couples, the person who is doing the overgiving, I say you're overextending, and your partner may be underworking, and that's been the dynamic, is I just lost it. It was so good. Oh, that you have to honor your needs first. Like that is kind of integral. And so if you are, overextending yourself in other spaces, or that's being witnessed, or your partner sees you maybe going over, coming home late from work, exhausted, and just doing everything, how do you expect them to help you with that? Because I think you have to honor and take care of your needs first. You show people how to treat you. If I say we got 1 more minute left, I got to go, our time is up. That's, setting a boundary versus maybe just going with the flow and hoping that you will end the call in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or maybe you'll notice, or, I'm worrying about how it might impact you over, my need to protect my time or go to my next appointment or whatever.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I love that reminder that as overextenders, as overgivers, that we have to honor our needs first. Because I think so often in those dynamics, we give in order to get our needs met versus taking the time, prioritizing the time, our self-care, whatever that looks like for us, in order to meet our needs for ourselves, versus essentially using other people in order to get our needs met.
When you say that, just so I understand it, using people to get our needs met, does that look like, I don't know, doing something for someone? Like maybe I say, I'll skip my lunch and I'll help you do this task instead of, would that be?
Totally. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if that relates with what you've experienced in work, but I do notice a pattern working with empaths is that when we're disconnected from ourselves and our own internal needs, we often overextend, we often overgive to other people, whether it's doing the laundry or doing tasks or paying more bills or, spending more time or, and I'm speaking from experience here, that I think that when we're disconnected from ourselves, we oftentimes try to be generous and give in order to fill that void or feel that sense of, care, love, we feel, we perhaps feel good for helping, or we, temporarily are proud of ourselves for, doing X or spending Y. But in reality, that's in my experience, that's manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually doing something not from a place of being grounded and well-resourced. We're actually using that person in order to meet a need for ourselves, which, is a setup.
Yeah, I've never thought about it like that, but it is. That's really interesting. Yeah, manipulating. Ooh, can I steal that? I'm
I mean, I'm not going to lie, probably 8 years ago at this point, my coach accused me of manipulating my partner. And it was a tough pill to swallow at first, but then in doing that inner inquiry, and it wasn't overnight, I actually took stock and realized how true it was, that I was actually completely disconnecting from myself, prioritizing the other person's preferences, wishes, needs, even often making up what I thought that they needed in order to feel good about myself, rather than just, writing in my journal or taking a bath or taking myself out on a date. A lot of that work for me, I started that healing journey by taking myself out on weekly dates.
Yes.
Really,
I think that's it's so, because ultimately, would you say that when you recognize that, when you were in that space, that you were maybe escaping the discomfort of being with yourself? That's,
very well said.
Yeah, because I resonate with that, and wanting to escape into work and productivity and, all these things, because I could not sit with myself and my thoughts and my feelings Yeah, especially as someone who, is leaning out of an avoidant attachment style,
Yeah,
I can compartmentalize like the best of them.
totally. And I think also for many givers who, empaths often identify as givers, like we're so disconnected from our internal needs that giving, overextending is often it's a knee-jerk reaction. Like I find with a lot of my clients, it's actually pretty uncomfortable to sit in the question, what do you need?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because so many of us don't know.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I see that a lot. Yeah. And even just to sit with what's it feel like to not know? That's what I say when people are quieter. They say, I don't know. I'm like, well, what's that like not to know?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, yeah, that's juicy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Did you did you watch the recent movie with J-Lo, Marry Me, and Owen Wilson?
No. You did?
I love her.
No,
But
I love J-Lo, but yeah, I haven't seen it.
highly recommend. But there's a brilliant quote in that movie that I'm not sure if I've shared it on the podcast. This may be a first, but it's so good. And Owen Wilson says to his daughter when he's preparing her for the math meet, he says, if you sit with the question long enough, the answer will come to you.
Mm-hmm. Simple, but yeah.
And I think that that's so true with our needs, right? If we sit with the question long enough, if we create the conditions and the space to sit with our own thoughts, the answers will come.
It's like, and it can be as simple as like, I have a little outdoor patio situation here. And earlier before our recording, I was like, okay, let's like get grounded, centered. I go outside to sit for a moment and I was like, put your phone back. Why are you bringing your phone? Like, why can't I just be, And so I've been like really trying to practice that, and it's getting easier. And even to the point where I don't have to tell myself, like, don't take the phone with you in the bathroom, or don't take, like just be. And like, I think that can kind of build that tolerance. I don't know if that sounds bad, but like tolerance for, being alone or in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where I try to start when that does come up with clients. What's a realistic, small little starter thing that you could practice or employ? Like where could we start to work that muscle? That's how I sort of phrase it usually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's shift gears a little here, because you and I were joking before we started this episode, before I hit record, about how I didn't know what the acronym SATC meant. But I would love to talk about the Sex and the City SATC myth of choosing between work, relationship, and fulfillment, and how that shows up in your work.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we were talking about Sex and the City, and this may be just a me thing. I don't know if anyone else will remember this, but it stuck with me. When I started watching Sex and the City, it was super old. I watched it when I was in college, like 2005, 4, 5, 6, something like that. And I remember
same.
Exact same. Okay, so you got me. Cool. And so I remember, I don't know what episode, I couldn't even tell you what the context was, but Carrie said something to the effect of, you can only have, you're always going to have one of these 3 things missing or not in a good place: work, your home, like apartment, like feeling good about where you live and like, and relationships. So you're going to likely be struggling with relationship issues. Maybe you don't like your apartment, or like maybe you've got roommates that you can't stand, or issues with work. And for some reason, that really resonated with me in that moment. And I was like, oh gosh, okay, I'm asking for too much. And so in a way, I think that I sort of moved forward with almost allowing and loose boundaries and not really speaking up, because I'm like, well, things are really good at work and things are really good in my relationship. So, or vice versa. And so I say that to say that typically with clients, I am exploring how the issue or the problem shows up in different spaces, but also clocking if they have similar sort of maybe beliefs or expectations. Like, what did it look like in growing up? Perhaps their parents worked around the clock and were never home, and they sort of think this is just what it is. Like, we don't have time to check in on our relationship. Like, we've got to make money, and this is what we're valuing. And so a lot can come from that. But as far as how that is impacting, I guess I'm listening for that in sessions. I'm trying to think how else that sort of is something that I use in sessions, but it is something that I like to share if I'm observing or hearing that, where, and also there can be patterns where people literally come in with this storyline that, when work is really great, my relationship, it deteriorates, or vice versa. And so that was a myth that I really had to work hard at undoing, because I wasn't really happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
And let's even say, I want to add this caveat that when we're talking about relationship, I have since expanded that to be relationship with self. Like, so it doesn't even necessarily have to include a partnership, or like if you don't have a relationship, oh, that's not going well, because I think it's not a necessity. I don't know, if you're kind of listening in on what women are speaking about culturally and what we're seeing in the media about, shifts in marriage and expectations that you must get married, have a kid, blah, blah, blah. I could go off on that tangent. But does that make sense what I'm saying?
It totally makes sense. And a couple themes that I hear in what you're sharing is like this theme of becoming resigned,
Yes.
or settling. And I think that being resigned and settling is, the enemy of fulfillment, the enemy of joy. When we settle the way things are, it creates no room for what's possible. It creates no space for a different experience, for a transformation, for a breakthrough, for possibility, for magic, because, our beliefs create our experience.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, it was about 3-4 years ago when I really started working on my healing journey and realizing how that was showing up for me, especially as I was working my business. I remember going to some kind of, someplace in New York. I went with friends to get drinks, two of my really best friends. And I was telling them work is amazing. Like, I can't believe the money I'm making. I feel really secure financially. And it feels so good. And I feel like I'm doing good work. And I was really excited about that. And I got my dream apartment. Like, I was so proud of myself. I had been such a long, I just felt like it felt so good. But I wasn't in a relationship, and I wanted to be, but I didn't want to admit that. And I basically I had a really negative attitude about dating. And I was telling my friends about all the stuff that I see on, Instagram about bad dates and guys and this and that, the third. And they were like, Jelisha, what do you do whenever you have a problem? You go take a course, you work with a coach, you will invest money to learn and expand on something you don't know. You've done it in business. Why are you not doing that in love? And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, well, what would that look like? And they were like, get off of Reddit, first of all. Like, I was looking at all these really negative threads online about how dating sucked, how there's no good men left. And as a woman who primarily dates men, and, just all this stuff was not making me open. It was having me close up. And I was like, I just need to accept that I'm going to live a single life, and that's fine. And I'm going to get okay with that and dive myself into work and travel and whatever. But that conversation, it was like, that's an example of like the, sort of looking at another context. Like, I'm over here learning all the things I have to learn to run a business where I feel taken care of and that I actually enjoy. I've taken 1 million classes, spent thousands of dollars, but I've not invested a penny in this area. I've read some books, but that led me to working with a dating coach. And it was the best experience of my life. I'll pause there.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I think that our willingness to declare what we want is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It was my first breakthrough in coaching, also declaring that I was going to fall in love and bring the man I was going to marry home for Thanksgiving that year.
And did it? Yeah.
This is a longer story that I don't know if we have time for, but the short version of it was that that Thanksgiving, 4 days before Thanksgiving, I went to a mutual friend's wedding with a friend who I'd known for 4 years. And we had our first kiss at that wedding, and we've been together ever since. And I did not bring him home for Thanksgiving, but we did have our first kiss 4 days before Thanksgiving. And for me, like, sometimes the outcome doesn't look exactly like what we declare, but I fulfilled on my declaration. And the wild thing is that a big part of that coaching project was to visualize how I wanted to feel in that relationship. I think so often we focus on what we want our partners to look like and what we want them to do career-wise and what their interests are. And so often the people we end up with, they don't fill and meet those ideas and visions, right? But we know how we want to feel in our relationship. And every day for, it was like 6 months, Jelisha, I sat on my meditation cushion every morning, first thing. I'm really good with routine. Okay. And I visualized how I wanted to feel in this relationship. And one of the visions that came to me stronger than any other was this idea that we would be at a party and we would be on opposite ends of the room, but I would feel so connected as if he was standing next to me with his hand on the small of my back. And literally the next month in December, at the time I lived in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, and we went to one of our neighbors' holiday parties in his house. And when we got home from the party, I asked him his experience of the party, and he told me my visualization.
Oh my goodness, this is so good.
And
wow.
He did not know my visualization. I hadn't shared it with a soul, right? At the time, I was probably pretty sheepish about it. But for me, it was terrifying, right? I don't think I've committed to visualizing anything to that degree ever since. But it really, for me, reinforced the power of our thoughts.
I love that story. That's so great. Oh, visualization. That's really powerful for me as well. Yeah, that's such a great story.
Yeah. Didn't know I was going to share that one today.
It was to be. Oh, and goes to show, like, I feel like we can get really caught up in like the how. Like, I want to get here, but what is it going to look like? And how do we get there? And I say over and over to couples, forget the how. I want to make sure we got the ending and what that looks like, feels like. How would you know you were there? Don't worry about the how right now. And I feel like that's what I felt when you were telling the story. You just what do you want to feel? How do you want to feel about yourself? Like, oh, love it. Yeah.
That everything you just shared is absolutely how I coach, right? The how is none of our business.
Yeah.
If we control the how, we're not leaving any space for magic or spirit or transformation or growth or expansion. If we need to know how we're going to get somewhere, then we're focusing. For me, that's ego, like that's fear versus trusting and allowing ourselves to expand and for the path to unfold.
Really. And isn't it freeing, like, not to have to worry about the how? Like, I've like really leaned into it. I'm just like, I'm not worried about that. I don't know.
I love it. I'm so with you. And honestly, as we wrap up this episode, I think that that's just a really beautiful reminder in relationship also, that we don't necessarily need to know how in order to share what we want. We don't necessarily need to have all of those answers figured out in order to trust our partners with our desires and our dreams and our preferences and our wishes. Absolutely. We can trust them with our desires.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, final question as we wrap up here today. This has been just a delightful conversation. I've really loved it. What has made the difference for you in becoming a prosperous empath?
It sounds simple, but community. That's been everything. I absolutely would not be here without community. I mean, even with that last example, with the dating coach and feeling like, I'm just going to resign myself. I'm not even going to participate in this. And having some shame around that. Like I uncovered some shame that I didn't want to even let anyone in on because I felt like that's super vulnerable. But the antidote to shame is community. Like that's what I found. And so when I'm feeling alone, when I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this? Or why does this keep happening? I'm going to find a community somewhere. I've become really good at it. And it's really helpful finding a positive solution focused, because there can be some groups that want to harp on the, problems. And you want to get away from that. But yeah, positive, like-minded community. Whether that's online, whether that's having a call. I have a call every 2 months with a group of practitioners. Like I have certain things that come up every so often that keep me connected with community, even when I'm not necessarily struggling with something. And it helps remind me, and it helps me to feel like, reminds me of who I am. Those are the spaces you want to go to, right?
Totally.
Yeah, it's like I like myself when I talk to you, Catherine. I feel like I can be myself, and I like how I experience myself in your presence. And that's something I'm, always listening for around anyone in my life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't agree with you more. This has been so wonderful. I can't wait to share this episode. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Catherine. It was lovely.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode, and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.